Hey everyone, this is Ari Whitten, and welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. Today I have with me a very special guest, Dan Pardi, who is someone that I've followed his work for many, many years now and been a fan of his work from afar, and recently had the chance to connect with him in person, face to face, and really am now even much more of a fan of his work than I was before. He's a brilliant guy. He's doing wonderful, wonderful work. And I follow his work. I'm a fan of his work. I love what he's doing, and I know you guys are going to love him. So I think this is going to be the first of several podcasts with Dan. So enjoy, and let me give you guys his quick bio before we get into this. Dan is the CEO of humanOS and the host of humanOS Radio. He's a researcher at Stanford University, and his specialties include building systems for health, behavior optimization, and habit building. So welcome, Dan, to the first of what will likely be several podcasts. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show finally.
It is really great to be here. I've known of your name for a while, and I've become more, fortunately, I've become more invested in your work recently, and I think you're doing great stuff, Ari. So thank you. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for the work that you do.
Yeah, thanks, brother.
And also thank you in advance for giving me more than one chance to come on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, if you screw this one up, then no more chances. Sorry.
Okay. No, I was going to look the other way. Get it right next time.
So I would love to start us off if you could just talk a bit about your background in health and as a researcher and kind of your educational background and all that.
Yeah, sure. You know, it's funny. You can tell a very consistent story about, this was my journey, but I think all of our journeys are filled with multiple streams, indicators that, yes, this is the direction that you should go because your interest is there, and hopefully it's met with some degree of capability to do something good in the space. But for me, a focus early in my life on the body came from an injury that I wanted to fix so that I could get back into this passion of mine, which was playing sports, soccer, and basketball. That led then into thinking that I wanted to do sports medicine, which actually became more of an interest in exercise physiology, particularly how and a good way to think of exercise physiology actually is not just how do we get to exercise better, but how does the body work under dynamic conditions? So whether you are exercising at different intensities or in different heat or cold. And that led actually to a real interest in neuroscience. Sounds like a bit of a leap there, but there was multiple tracks in the exercise physiology department in my master's at Florida State. And the track that I was on became the official neuroscience track a few years later. So we were looking at leptin levels and how they regulate blood pressure. And then I did some work with Dean Ornish. I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with his name. So right out of school, and what he was doing was looking at, he was constructing a multifactorial lifestyle program to attempt to address patients that have existing prostate cancer. So I really appreciated that because so much research is trying to isolate a single variable so that we have an understanding of those controls, right? We have control over that one thing that then gives us confidence about, is that one thing having an important effect in whatever we're looking at? We also, though, need to do a different type of work where we might have less certainty about what's having the effect, but we tie together what we think are good lines of work to see if we can optimize for the patient outcome. And that's really what we're trying to do. So it was stress management and diet and interpersonal communication counseling with the patient and their spouse. We had 180 patients come once a week for a 7-hour intervention where they would visit the different stations, and then we would have a community meal. It was really incredible work, and it left an impression on me. From there, I went and worked in bioinformatics, a company called Double Twist. We were using clustering alignment technology to try to mine the human genome. And then from there, I went to the pharmaceutical industry, which was really just through a connection at the job that I had at Double Twist, because that company went out of business. All companies in the space did. They were all sort of absorbed into pharma. And so now I find myself in the pharmaceutical industry, working on a drug in sleep, knowing nothing about either, and becoming extremely fascinated in sleep. And also the medication that we had, it was a very unique situation because the that particular drug is called GHB, gamma hydroxybutyrate, and it has a very rich history. So it has clear therapeutic, interesting potential, but it also has a history of drug abuse. It has a history of being used for sexual facilitated assault. And yeah, it just was, there was a lot to learn. There was a lot to understand. And eventually I started the medical affairs department at Jazz Pharmaceuticals and ran a research grant program and scientific publications until I got to the place where I wanted to do my own work. And I left to start my PhD. So my PhD work the sponsorship is through Leiden University in the Netherlands. And I work with endocrinology and neurology there. And then at the Zeitzer Lab, where we do sleep and circadian biology research. So I have this great collaborative group, very supportive, very smart. And at the same time, when I started my PhD, I was hearkening back to my work with Ornish, and I knew that I eventually wanted to do something related to public health, which is a sort of boring way of saying it, but something that related to health, actual health versus disease management or sickness care, or even getting somebody better from being sick. But how do we keep people healthy? And I developed something called the loop model to sustain health behaviors. That took about 6 months of a very deep dive into behavioral science. And the executive summary of it is, in order for people to adopt and sustain health behaviors long-term, they should know why they're doing a specific action. They should know how to do it. So why to do it, how to do it, are you doing it, and is it working? And really each one of those 4 components are different from each other. And so one deficit that I observed in public health discourse or efforts was sort of monosyllabic efforts to try to get all of your health out of one silver bullet. And so it's like, if you're trying to do paleo, for just pull some example out of it, and you're not doing it well, it's because you didn't learn enough. So we're going to put more information at you. And so the exclusive attempt to fix the problem always happens through more information or just that one vehicle. And I think what's happened is that it causes a lot of confusion. And on the other side of the equation, you have technology companies that are doing all sorts of things to trigger and reward people for doing actions, but they're sort of decontextualized from any sort of important paradigm. And so, like, nobody's going to just keep doing something because they're getting a notification on their phone if they don't know why. They might do it for 3 weeks and then stop. That's very common. And so you really need an umbrella approach to address health effectively. And that's what the efforts that I've been making. So in parallel, I started to work on early version of Dan's plan, which is now it's all been growing towards humanOS, and then also doing the science for my PhD. And that's a long-winded explanation of my background.
Beautiful. What's your PhD going to be in?
Yeah, so my PhD has basically 2 parts. A lot of it was in the science around gamma hydroxybutyrate. So looking at it in Parkinson's disease, in narcoleptics, in a lot of trying to understand metabolism. So we know that one of the side effects of GHB usage, and one of its actual usage before it was banned, because you could used to buy the stuff in a grocery store or like a supplement store, is weight loss. So what is causing that effect from the agent? And it's a challenge. We don't have a clear answer.
Oh, really? I always thought it was because it boosts growth hormone levels. Is that not accurate?
It is that is accurate. It's just probably not the only thing that's taking place.
Gotcha.
So if you look at the end of it, gamma hydroxybutyrate, some people might think, oh, that sounds familiar. Beta hydroxybutyrate is the major ketone that a lot of people have fascination and interest in now. And then there's also butyrate, which is produced by the gut bugs pooping after they eat fiber. All butyrates, all 3 of those have some overlapping effects and then distinct effects, but they do act as HDAC inhibitors, which affects sort of the epigenetic regulation of genes. And you can see, for example, the activation, reprogramming, differentiation of beta cells if you take things like butyrate or beta hydroxybutyrate. And so they have these very interesting effects in the body. So there's a panoply of different effects that are taking place with these compounds. And GHB, what's so interesting about it is that it's one of the only agents that will increase the amount of slow wave sleep that you get. And most hypnotics that you take, because you do take it at night, they will help you go to sleep faster, but they'll actually reduce the depth of sleep that you get.
Right.
So they're okay for short-term usage if you just can't sleep for, let's say you travel to Europe or you have something very stressful in your mind. They're really problematic if you take them long-term.
Right.
So that because of that effect, there was interest in studying this drug for every condition that had sleep as some sort of sequelae to that condition: depression, Parkinson's disease, fibromyalgia, et cetera. And so there was great interest in the grant program that I ran. So I had to set up the system to receive grants, to review them with our board, and how to do that ethically and create best practices. So that was a lot of the work that I did there, which was stimulating too.
Well, I have several more questions on that topic specifically, but I know we have lots to talk about. So,
yeah.
Real quick, tell us about humanOS and what that's all about, because you had originally done work under a brand called Dan's Plan. I know you were working with Stephan Guyenet a lot, doing a lot of stuff related to sleep, stuff related to helping people lose weight. And now, over the last maybe year or two, everything's shifted towards humanOS, which I love what you're doing with this. But can you just talk to everyone a bit about what humanOS is all about?
Yeah, I'll talk about that evolution, because the thing that I'm quite proud of, what came first was the investment into really the model that I thought was scientifically backed, that was going to lead to outcomes that we really care about, which is the lifelong adoption of good habits. And in fact, I was talking with my team the other day that the use of the term behavior change and habits, they're sort of feckless in real life, right? It's academic and something that you can exchange and talk about, like, this is what's happening, but you don't really want to use it in the intervention itself, I think. It's kind of funny. But anyway, Dan's Plan was really building towards some of the first testing out some of the original ideas. And part of that was collaborating. It's always been part of the vision, was to collaborate with good thinkers. Stephan and I went deep real quick and started to put together what we call the Ideal Weight Program, which is to say, what are all the determinants of body weight? And then how do we affect people's behavior around those determinants so that they can get the outcome that you really want? Because the outcome that people really want is a permanent reduction in body fat level, not a temporary loss of weight. And whether somebody articulates that or not, that is what we are really after.
Yeah.
How do we achieve that? And this is going to probably get into deeper parts of the conversation overall today, but one existing downfall that humans do currently is we look for the silver bullet, right? We look for the one thing that's going to explain everything. Where my opinion of the reality is that there are many, many different things that have an influence. Some of those have higher priority or more of an impact than others. But overall, the more of those determinants of whatever your goal might be that you can include and modify in the right direction, the more likely you are going to experience success with whatever that specific outcome might be. So now with humanOS, what we do is we create peer-reviewed health courses on a diverse set of topics that affect the human body. So we have a new program that's 4 courses on circadian rhythms. We have one on the Mediterranean diet. There's 11 courses in the Ideal Weight Program. The courses are designed to be short. They're interrupted with quizzes, and we do that intentionally. It causes more friction because you can't just put it on in the background, but we want you to really attend to it. And what we're trying to do is, it's all based off of this. I came up with this term with information. With information, we have fresh, familiar, and fluent. So fresh is the new stuff, right? We have a bias towards just sort of hearing what's new. It's exciting, haven't heard it before. Familiar is where a lot of people land. And familiar means, yeah, I've heard it before, but I can't really tell you about it. And it's really difficult to implement knowledge in your life if you don't know it well enough to teach it. And so fluency is really what we're trying to promote, which means that you could sit down and have a cup of tea or coffee with a friend and tell them about what you learned. And your ability to exploit that information for your benefit is drastically enhanced when you get to that level. That's what we're trying to facilitate. And so that's one part. And then we've got things like daily recipes and workouts. You could use those or not. right? So we're not saying this is the right way, but rather we think that we're serving as choice architects. We're giving you good options. Pretty much anyone that you choose, you could probably do well with. Maybe not, right, for your specific situation, but they're all generally good options, and then you need to personalize and find out. But that is then trying to simplify a person's day. Can we use technology in this fashion to make today easier? And we also have a tracking component where we know that the behavioral science strongly suggests that if you have a very clear goal and you have objective means to track that, you're much more likely to reach that goal. And one of the challenges that we have in modern life is not that we don't know something's important, is that life gets in the way. And so we have to think about strategies to stay engaged with these things that we know are good for us. I call them the mundane but meaningful over the long term. And I think we need what I call countervailing technology that helps counteract the technology that's causing us to live in different ways. And one solution is just give it up altogether. It's not practical for a lot of people. And it possibly isn't even ideal, because a lot of these things that are potentially health impairing, they're simply powerful, and we need to learn to live with them, because there's also interwoven into these things like social media or technology usage are good things too, right? So if we can, it's about responsible usage in a way. And it all comes down to, for me, is the overall sort of thesis of humanOS is, can we make you more knowledgeable about the things that can help you? Can we make you more knowledgeable about yourself and empower your ability to then execute on those good ideas, so that your pattern of living becomes defined not by the occasional dalliance of, going to the gym 3 times a month, but that the regular inclusion of the thing that's going to be good for you. So that is the overall mission of what we're doing. And then we're going to be adding, how we do that is something that we're constantly iterating and adding to, but I'm pretty excited about where we are now.
Yeah, me too. Like I said at the beginning, I'm a fan of what you're doing. I love it. And, I listen to your podcast myself, and I'm a member of your program, and I'm also intimately familiar with a lot of the stuff that you've taught for a long time. And you're producing great content. I should point out, I do not give this endorsement to most people that I speak to and have on the podcast. I have a lot of people on the podcast that I like and have value to give, but rarely do I express this kind of like, yes, you guys, everybody listening to this needs to be following humanOS, follow the podcast, sign up for the program. Like, this is really quality content that everyone needs to see. So I think what you just said is a really nice segue into transitioning into the meat of this conversation that I want to have with you. I want to talk about health philosophy, and I want to talk about, and people hear that word philosophy and their eyes might immediately start to glaze over. This is not going to be boring, and this is extremely important for everyone to hear. But Dan, there's this, and you could probably articulate this better than I can, but there's so many different views and paradigms, philosophies, and schools of thought about health, and all these different approaches that are now emerging. We have like the evidence-based fitness community that it's like, hey, everything's just calories in, calories out. There's everything else outside of calories in, calories out is nonsense and quackery. And that's kind of their whole bubble. And then we have, conventional MDs who primarily operate in a paradigm where their tools are drugs and surgeries for the most part, wonderful, amazing technologies in certain areas and also very limited in other areas. And most of them tend to be not very aware of those limitations and the blind spots in their paradigm. We also have like alternative schools of health, which are unfortunately often a mix of quackery and pseudoscience, and oftentimes actually very good stuff that is evidence-based. And we have the emergence of functional medicine and integrative medicine and all kinds of different kind of schools of thought. And I know you're you're very into like the meta of all of this, like to like survey the whole landscape. And I am very too, I'm very much this way too, which is why, we talked about this a lot in our first conversation and kind of geeked out, and I love what you were expressing, but kind of like looking at what's going on in this whole landscape of health and all these different schools of thought about how they're thinking about it. I would love for you to kind of articulate this landscape of health and also healthcare and also like why there is so much chronic disease in the world today. And we can get into that in layers, and I'll let you lead the way from here.
Okay, so I have been thinking about this a lot recently in particular, and I've thought about it. There are moments over the last couple of years where I've been able to dedicate a deeper dive into this exactly, and it stays with me most of the time, but sometimes you're focused on something specific. But I think that operating within the world with the right mind frame is possibly one of the most powerful interventions that we could possibly adopt, or you're going to get a lot of power from that. So in order to, I think, talk about some of these very specific ideas that you brought up, I want to go back and there's a course that we created called Road of Health. So a lot of this is going to allude to the information that is contained within there. The purpose of that is to say, we're not going to talk about the specifics here, but we're going to talk about the mind frame that you need in order to move forward in a way that is what I think it's my best thinking on the subject now, in terms of like, I'm sure that will evolve, but it's where I am now. So generally, this idea of, well, what does health mean? And I remember I was giving a presentation at a company a couple of years ago, probably 5 years ago, and somebody asked me that question, and I just stumbled because it's one of those questions that's so big, it's really hard to address. And it turns out that defining health has been hard over the centuries, because it's really a term that means multiple different things. So when you say that one thing, you're not exactly sure what somebody's speaking to. But the World Health Organization did a good job in the 1980s after earlier attempts in the century where they sort of failed. But they basically defined health as your ability to withstand challenges to your health. So resilience and your ability to maintain homeostasis in the face of challenges. But the other second aspect of health was that health serves as a resource for life, in that it helps you achieve your goals and your aspirations. I often think a lot about energy. So there's two ways, am I hamstrung by a specific sickness injury? Or have I been attending to my health in a way that makes me feel really vibrant and robust? And so if that's what health means, then, our healthcare system must be totally designed around achieving those objectives. And it's not at all, right? We know that because our healthcare system gets, I think, often much maligned. There's tons of issues, but it was born at a time when humans were fighting the biggest challenge to life that we'd ever known, which was infection. So it came out of the 18th century, and our knowledge around pathogens, et cetera, just gave us some new visibility into how we could address them. And that created the basis of our contemporary healthcare system and its marriage to a pharmaceutical industry that was able to create vaccines and antibiotics that could address them. And it was amazingly successful. We forget about that because we've been born into a time where all of that benefit has been realized. And so now our normal is just that it's always been there. But if you were born in 1910, your health, the average life expectancy was about 47 to 49 years, I think. And within 1 century, that went up 70%, so that if you're born in 2016, your life expectancy was close to about 80 years. That's almost like 2 lives in 1 life. And so that has been really, really successful. But the problem is that all those additional years were now burdened with chronic disease. And what we've tried to do is use the old model of, let's say, well, we're just going to wait for diabetes to arrive. You're perfectly healthy until you get sick. We're going to wait till diabetes to arrive. We're going to drug it, and it's going to go away.
Right, because you don't, treat an infection with antibiotics before you get an infection.
Right.
You wait till there's an infection, and then you start to administer a drug. I mean, it only makes sense.
Right.
And so they're looking at a lot of these chronic diseases, diabetes, or many other types of diseases through that same kind of model.
Yeah. So what you do give in advance is the vaccination, right? Mm-hmm. The vaccination is meant to try to address things before it occurs. And we've actually literally tried to create vaccinations against chronic diseases that have been very costly failures. And I see this as it's a failure of perspective. It's a failure of an incomplete understanding of appreciation of all that is health, and therefore a system that is meant to address all parts of it. And so I'm giving a TED Talk in September, and what I'm going to propose in that talk is that an effective healthcare system, or a more effective one, has a very good sick care system that is doing the latest with surgeries and medications and diagnosis, trying to figure out, if you do have something, you figure it out as soon as you can, and then we figure out ways to then address that problem. That's great. We still need to do that. We just can't treat every aspect of health that way. So we need an effective sick care system, but we also need an effective self-care system. And that self-care system should look entirely different than the sick care system. And we see a lot of attempts to try to medicalize self-care, which is really about lifestyle. And so my opinion is that in an ideal world, self-care begins really with when we start to train and educate young children. So I don't know exactly what the percentage is, but let's say 50% of, I think, schooling should be dedicated to giving young kids, the ability to actually know how to attend to their bodies throughout their life. But if you think about what that challenge is, it's not just like, I took a course on it, and then when I got to an adult, then I was fine. If you think about what the real challenge is, you have to learn fundamentals. You have to then learn the ability to, like, okay, I'm making this a part of my life. But we live in a world now where the torrent of information is more than even one can keep up with. So there's new ideas about how to better take care of ourselves all the time. And your ability to stay in sync with that is going to benefit you. But we also live in a world that is changing. So it's not like we're living on the Pleistocene and we're just getting a lot more information about ourselves. We're getting a lot more information about ourselves. We're also getting, the world is changing at a blink of an eye, right? So new technology is invented, like the cell phone or even Fortnite, and it changes how people live instantaneously. And then you're changing. So the information is changing, the environment is changing, and you're changing across the lifespan. And so I think a mature, sophisticated relationship trains the capacity of somebody who doesn't want to necessarily be like you and I are completely invested in health. That's our work. They can be a lawyer or an architect or whatever, but they are not outsourcing how their lifestyle as the responsibility of their doctors, their government, or somebody else. That there's a fully embracing that your health is something that you need to attend to on a daily basis and get better at, and you're the one that benefits if you do. And what we treat it as now is that, you go to let's say in a perfect world, you go to the doctor, your primary care, and you talk about, you do some tests and they give you a couple of tips about how to be healthy from somebody that's not trained in that discipline of health. That's not, even in a perfect world, if they spend all of their time, that's not how we change how we live. That's totally not optimized for that. So that is really, I think we treat it too casually. We're perfectly healthy until we're not. It's not true, right? The new major issue of today's world is not infectious disease, although, with antibiotic resistance, et cetera, it could be. It's not like that's perfectly solved, but let's just encapsulate that and say, yes, it is. And it's chronic disease, and it's learning about all the different things that influence it, of which we know there are many. So that's what I think that's probably the best approach to it. And if you weren't born into a world where 50% of your school is dedicated to teaching you how to be healthy, then what do you do now? And luckily, I don't think that you didn't miss the boat. You can make it a importance in your life, and many people do. So everybody listening to this already is doing that. You can make it an importance of your life. So it's not like I'm talking to people saying you don't get it. It's more about a perspective shift that, yes, your investment, being weird and caring, is really smart. It's really smart.
So I want to come back to something briefly that you kind of went over in passing, but I think is a really important point. Can you define the World Health Organization's definition of health for me one more time?
Yeah, sure. So it's two parts. It's the ability to withstand challenges or threats to your health. So that would be like an infection and your ability to recover that, to maintain homeostasis in the face of those challenges. The second part, though, which is what I think is a really very rich opportunity, is that health is a resource for realizing your goals and aspirations. Mm-hmm. And that's where I sort of want to then introduce a different term. And this term is, there's an impurity to the term health, because then if I say health, are you thinking, it almost doesn't mean anything because it can mean a lot of things. So we want to be more specific. And so we then talk about like fitness. Well, fitness is just one very, very small part of it. And it also, if you're operationalizing for fitness, you could actually do some things that aren't necessarily operationalizing around just your health. That was the primary focus.
Mm-hmm.
Is it prevention? That's very much in the medical mindset of like, well, it's all about the disease and preventing it. And prevention doesn't get people to act, right? You're not going for a run to prevent peripheral arterial disease. It's not how we live. And is it, is it wellness? I don't know what that even means. So I think the term that I really like is health performance, which is the space above sickness that is encapsulated in the health term. That, first of all, it's what you are performing at. It's your lifestyle. It's the willful actions that you're taking. And it's also indicative of the performance of your health to then help you perform in life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's action oriented, and then it leads to an outcome of better performance by virtue of good health or optimized health.
Beautiful. And then health, we're still looking at as resilience, the capacity to withstand stressors and be robust,
Mm-hmm.
as well as health as a resource, as kind of this energy reserve or vitality reserve that is fueling your pursuits in life.
Yeah,
I think that's actually a wonderful definition of health, and obviously far superior to just the typical absence of disease sort of thinking. But what you said in passing that's really interesting is, I think, is a point worth making, is you asked the question, is our current healthcare system optimized for what they are saying is the definition of health? Resilience, energetic reserves, kind of robustness, vitality.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what, like, when you go to a hospital, are they, or to see your doctor, are they doing interventions for you that are actually facilitating those things?
Yeah. Only if you have an existing sickness or disease that can hopefully get you to a better place, but not at all helping prevent that from occurring.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're both needed. And, we're not going to, this whole conversation could be on the mess that is our healthcare system and insurance, and sort of the way there's so many problems with it, but sort of looking at it from like an idealized perspective, that taking care of us when we're sick should be in the realm of doctors. But also in that ideal world, the doctors would have really supreme self-care help as well. It's kind of like, I made an analogy last night. The way that we treat it now is that, well, you go to this pilot that knows how to fly a plane, and you're assuming that they know how to fly a helicopter because they know how to fly a plane. It's different,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's very different. So what you eat, the doctors only have 3 hours of training in sleep, 8 hours in nutrition. These are the major movers. Part of them are major movers in the health performance aspect, right? What you eat, the way I look at it is you've got a canvas of a 24-hour period of the day, right? And you need to populate that with a lot of the things that are going to provide those environmental and behavioral signals to keep the body working well.
Mm-hmm.
So we need a totally different approach to that.
So what does that look like? I mean, given those definitions of health, what would an optimal healthcare system look like? What should it look like, in your opinion?
Yeah. So this answer will probably be unsatisfactory in terms of not having specific suggestions. Well, you just got to be sure that you're eating this and that you're, exercising this amount. So
8 hours of sleep every night, drink this many ounces of water every day. Yeah,
exactly. Those things will probably evolve, right? And there will be fundamental determinants. So we have to make sure that we're getting all of those. And then we'll also undoubtedly learn of better areas to focus. So we might learn that, if we use this approach, this lens to view our health, then this leads to a lot of efficiency in the efforts that we make in yielding health. I think, there's a lot around mitochondria that you can think about as using that as sort of that operating principle. But we have to know, like 15 years ago, circadian rhythms and gut health was not a part of any model that was aimed at trying to predict this type of health, right? It was about nutrition and exercise. So we are going to be learning more. And so the problem now then with evidence-based medicine is there's several problems with it. It gives us a high amount of confidence in knowing it because it's been rigorously tested through double-blind placebo-controlled trials to know, yes, this actually is a good approach generally. But none of those types of trials are looking to optimize for an individual. And so one example of a problem with that is you could say with reasonable confidence that most people need between 7 and 9 hours of sleep per night. You can say that. That's what the recommendations of the National Sleep Foundation, based upon an assessment of all the literature and agreement with most of the scientists. But so then you say, all right, well, the average is 8. But if you need, assuming that you're still fall in that 95% confidence interval of most people that do actually need that, if I say get 8, Ari, and you actually need 7, then it could lead to behaviors like, well, I need to take Ambien because I'm not sleeping enough, right? It can lead to these externalities of kind of improperly using evidence-based averages. Or the converse, get 8, but you need 9, and now I've just prescribed a sleep deficit to you, which will have all of the downstream consequences of somebody getting an hour less sleep, no matter what your need is. Mm-hmm. And so that's an example of part of the problem. Another part of the problem with evidence-based medicine is that it is very expensive, and we live in a capitalistic society where we're not going to go through the process of testing in these multi-million-dollar studies if there's not a chance for financial remuneration. So one thing that frustrates the heck out of me is at the end of every paper that's looking at something like a plant polyphenol, they're trying to make it into a druggable target, right? How do we then find a way to make this into something that we can capitalize on? And so a lot of that natural-based research only goes so far. It only goes so far, and it will only ever go that far. So that's another problem. So,
and just complete that thought for people who, why will it only go so far?
So it'll only go that far because people can't benefit on the backside of, making money from a plant-based compound. Right?
And this is just to clarify for people, this is not any sort of conspiracy theories or anything like that. This is just simple, like, economics of this. You can only put so much money into something without getting anything in return before there are people who are funding this that are like, okay, I think we've spent enough.
Yes. I hold no opinion that any sort of big agency is out to get us. Undoubtedly, there are egregious errors that you could point to with every big sort of calcified agency, but I don't think that it gets really wacky quickly.
Yeah.
But generally, I think that it is just the virtue of the fact that if somebody cannot capitalize on it, like, it comes down to, well, the researchers, they need to figure out a way to publish. It might not be publishable. That's probably like a lower concern, but they also then be able to fund their labs. And so it's just sort of the ecosystem that we live in, and it's one of the problems. And it takes a very long time. So one of the problems with evidence-based research with cutting-edge modalities that, like, let's say, consumer tech that is meant to change behavior, the papers that come out today are on the device that was available 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so it's already obsolete by the time it's public. Mm-hmm. So that's another issue. And so now is the question, we have evidence-based medicine, but it's imperfect. So do we disregard it? Do we not look to it? No, it's valuable. We consider it, but it has a place. We don't live there only. Healthcare systems live there because that's where they have the most confidence, and it's not the best way to achieve perfect health for that individual. And then we have this range above this, which is, you can call it biohacking. There's lots of different terms, functional medicine. It's trying to do better. It's trying to do better. And all of these are imperfect too. So you could look at functional medicine and you could say, you know what, you're causing this person to spend a lot of money on this test that is not validated, and somebody can take that opinion and say, this doctor wasted a lot of money with me, or money of mine. Or you could say, well, I'm trying to go beyond, right? I'm unsatisfied with the care that I'm getting from the main system, which is really going to walk me down towards a drug, or do nothing if I'm not at that druggable limit. And yet you want to try to really prevent it. So eat right and exercise. There's nothing wrong with that guidance. It's just not helpful. And so one issue that I see that's popping up is still the over-medicalization of lifestyle. So in the functional medicine community, the person might have really great resolution if they start to do a lot of things well that lead to the lifestyle, and yet we're hunting down we're trying to find that silver bullet still. We're trying to find the infection, the equivalent of the infection that's causing everything. And in that space, there's some truth there and there's some false there. So the way that I think of it is you really want to try to get as many things of those basics right. And the way that you need to first. And then if you have existing issues, then you can take more exotic approaches to try to hunt down what that might be. But one of the reasons why we have so much autoimmunity issues is because we live in a world that has artificial light in it, which then causes a downstream effect on misaligning our circadian rhythms and thereby our immune system, causing inflammation in our gut. We never think about that if you're looking just within the gut and you're not looking at the entire system.
There's also, I love what you just said there. There's also, it's funny, I'm like bursting with things I want to say. I'll try and condense this down. I think that tendency towards searching for the silver bullet is some kind of like weakness in human psychology. We all, I think, are built with this tendency to find the one thing.
Yeah.
And this is the one problem, and here's the one pill and the one physiological pathway and the one biomarker, and the one herb or whatever that we're going to use to fix this thing. And we just know that physiology is 1,000 times more complex than that level of thinking. And it's just, and it happens in the conventional medical community. It happens in functional and alternative medical communities too.
Yeah.
Like you said, that search for the one thing and the silver bullet.
Yeah.
To put this in functional medicine terms, I think if you were to do 1,000 different tests of 1,000 different biomarkers, you could find abnormal biomarkers on every one of those things. Like, let's say you did an organic acids test and found three of those organic acids are off, high or low or something. You could do a different kind of blood test or a metabolomics test, a hormone panel, salivary, urinary, or urine, and all these. You could do 1,000 different tests, and you will show abnormalities on all these different things. My point is, there isn't a pill that fixes each one of those abnormalities on each one of those different tests. And we're looking at system-wide dysfunctions, and we have to have systems thinking in how we correct those things, not just, this abnormal biomarker means I prescribed this drug or this herb, or this vitamin, or, and so on. It needs to be much, much more of systems-wide thinking, at least in my opinion.
I'll give you a specific example around your exact point. Let's say you go and you get a test done and it shows that your cortisol level is high or low for a certain time, that what it should be it's out of the range. And then you give some supplements to try to correct that, when the real correction is actually aligning the circadian rhythm. So the timing of your cortisol rhythm is actually synchronized with in a way that you want it to be for proper functioning.
Exactly.
One may address symptoms, but it might not. It might even just mask the symptoms, which is a lot of medicine does.
Yeah, and just to add to that, there is actually good data showing not only bright light exposure in the morning, evening light exposure, artificial light at night, even things like night eating or being a night owl chronotype, will all cause abnormal morning cortisol level measurements. And despite that body of evidence existing, literally almost every physician, every functional medicine doctor that I know that tests for morning cortisol levels does not address those factors. Like at least 95% of them does not address those factors. They just go, your adrenals are off. It's adrenal fatigue. Let's give you some adaptogenic herbs and maybe some adrenal cortex glandulars or something like that.
Totally.
There's some vitamin B and vitamin C.
Yeah.
And I mean, that level of thinking is extraordinarily problematic.
And I might say something that's a little surprising here. I don't actually even mind if you have a strategy to try to address something important in somebody that's not going to do the right behavior, but it should be mindful of it, right? So the order of priority of how you try to treat the person starts with the thing that's causing the issue, or all the things, and then you adapt according to what the capability is of that individual. So that's different than just, again, trying to look for the keys under the spotlight, which is, and there's my old boss had a saying, if you're a hammer, the world is a nail, right? So we have these trainings, we have training. That's why people have to oftentimes go to a lot of different doctors if they have something complex, because you go to the person that has specialization in one area and that's where they're going, that's their expertise. So that's where they're going to look. Mm-hmm. Not an awful thing, but again, if we're talking about how to make the system overall more effective, there's definitely crosstalk between all versions of sick care and self-care. And that self-care, really the world that we're living in is a lot of it is about personal responsibility, which people they don't love. Some people don't, they bristle to that. It's like, oh, it's your fault. It's not really the message. I like to say is like, there's opportunity here to do something that's better for you. And I will never have all the information across my entire life of all the things that matter. What will we know 15 years from now, 10 years from now that we didn't know, that we don't know now? And, it's just like with the gut microbiome and with circadian rhythms, like that's new information. And so you have to have the ability to adapt. And this gets to what I think is an evolved strategy for health today, which is aiming to try to understand, it's basically a regular engagement, listening to podcasts. It's finding your sort of brand. How do you want to like consume information and learn? It's making a regular effort towards it, but realizing that information alone does not vaccinate you against the healthy lifestyle. So I think that probably the best heuristic is, how do you find ways to live more naturally?
Mm-hmm. Let's delve into that a bit more. And one of the things that you shared with me before is you have an analogy of astronauts. And I think this is a really good analogy. I'm pissed off that I didn't think of this myself, but I'm going to have to steal it from you.
Sure.
So can you kind of explain how this works and how this relates to the epidemics of chronic disease that we're seeing today?
Yeah. So I think of it as a very useful metaphor, space travel, right? First of all, it is a visceral illustration of just how powerful technology is. We can transport people off of our planet and into space. And so because we can see it, it's kind of demonstrates that power. But despite all the money that we've spent to try to counteract the known negative health influences of being in space, you see loss in blood volume, right? You see a 30% reduction in skeletal muscle. This is after being in space for about a month. You see the dysregulation of the immune system and reactivation of viruses like herpes. And then not even to mention all the different psychological consequences of being alone in space and stressed out. And so the point is that if you take the human body out of the original conditions through which we've evolved, then things are going to break, right? Things are going to start to just function less ideally. We don't need to leave the planet in order for the power of technology that surrounds us, this environment that has completely embedded itself into modern life and into our worlds, to cause us to live in a way that is unnatural, thereby causing a natural factors deficiency. We're not getting a sufficiency of the natural factors that aren't just health boosting, they're requisite for the healthful functioning of our body, like light exposure and sun exposure, et cetera. And so the goal of mine is not to say give up all modern luxuries, it's just to learn how to live with them, right? I don't think that tech is going to be I think the ultimate part of the solution is you guiding your life, but then using tech to empower your goals and desires to then live more naturally. I think this idea of like, turn on some AI algorithm telling you to shut down your phone, you're not going to listen to it if you don't understand why. You have to have the desire and then possibly let tech power you. Now, if you say, I want to give up all tech, that's cool. And I'm just going to completely check out, that's great. So we only need tech because in my mind, the reality of the world is that it's required for us doing our jobs in so many ways. So we just need to live. It's kind of like with a young child, some television might be fine, right? We all need a chance to chill out. It's storytelling at an appropriate age, and there's better choices than others. But just letting somebody watch television all day, every day, you might have the desire to do that, but you have to counteract it. Similarly, if you were just listening to your taste buds, you'd only eat ice cream all day long. And that's what kids want to do because they have no awareness of they have no awareness of the fact that like, it could be bad for me and health. It's like, I will eat my dinner if I can have ice cream. So we have these extraordinarily powerful shapers of how we live that exist in our world. We all need to learn how to live with them. And it's great to embrace that. I mean, it's a constant struggle. And I also think it's kind of fun to, it's good to have fun with it. And so what I think powers this more than anything else is the recognition and getting exposure to the feeling of getting your body to work really well. And so a lot of what I do is also focusing people on the things you can do within your day to make your day better. And that, I think, is sort of the secret sauce, because long-term health prevention, we all care. Nobody wants diabetes. Nobody wants heart disease. It does not get people to change their action, but making yourself better at your day, making it more frictionless, helping health bring out the fullness of your personality. It's not just productivity, I got more done, but it's also, do you have then enough energy to, did you get through, it's the feeling of satisfaction of doing whatever your work as well. It's then having enough energy for hobbies and for fully showing up with your family life and being your best self and with your friends. It's all of those things that feel good that should, I think that if we can harness that, we can use that to motivate your continual engagement. And the one other thing that I'll say too that I think is really important is in this world where we don't know everything, and there's plenty of expensive tests that try to guide us in the right direction. I'm not opposed to all of them, but what's probably the best signal? And I think right now, subjective signals supersede almost everything. So how do you feel? Can you engineer a lifestyle where you feel really robust, sharp, all the things that are actually that aspect of health that we said is this helping you achieve your goals in life? The problem with that is that we can accommodate to the feeling of feeling less robust as normal. And so if you can get exposure to that feeling of feeling better, then if that is distinct enough, then that can keep motivating you to keep going. But a specific example of this is whatever's on my phone at night, I've engineered this device to be a interest machine for me, right? My apps are different, whatever, than others. But if I'm going to have the autoplay on Netflix for the next show that I'm watching stop, I need to say, you know what? I want to feel my best tomorrow, so I'm going to put it down, even though that looks really appealing. And that's a very specific example of like this competitive battle that's taking place with your desire to want to show up with these things that are going to try to get you to engage with them that might not have your best interest in mind.
Yeah, beautifully said. There's one aspect of what you're talking about that I want to come back to, which is this kind of, there's like there's a battle, I think, of paradigms of people who are, I think, more in the ancestral movement, who are acknowledging, hey, the modern world is clearly deviated from our ancestral past, the environment that our biology has evolved in and is designed for, and is that environment is necessary for us to express optimal health. So we need to move back to that kind of environment. And then there's people who I think are like, tech will save us, do a microbiome test and do metabolomics panels and hormone testing, and let's optimize your hormones and your biomarkers and do these pills and these injections. And, I'll give you a funny little anecdote, but I met a guy at the beach who was there with his wife and two kids. And I was there with my wife and son, and he kind of interrupted us and started talking to us. And to make a long story short, and this turned into like an hour and a half kind of hanging out with this couple, but the guy's like a super ultra wealthy person. At least he's either that or he's like totally delusional and was making up a bunch of stuff. But he was like, oh yeah, last week I was on my yacht in Monaco with the Prince of Monaco, and and this and that, and and I told him what I do, and he's like, oh, you need to be my guy. I'll pay you and I'll do consults with you. And he said, money's no object. I'll pay you whatever you want. But then the story got more complex, and he's like, by the way, he's there drinking, like chugging beers, like multiple beers and liquor, various kinds of liquor while we're there in the span of an hour and a half, smoking a cigar. And he's like, I need your help because, I know how to eat and I know I should, how to be healthy, but I have a problem. I'm a partier and I can't stop drinking and smoking cigars and staying up late and not sleeping and all this stuff. And then he starts telling me he owns a company that is developing nanobots that you can inject into your body that monitor your health parameters. So he was telling me how he was trying to convince me that I should go get these nanobots injected into me to monitor my health and how great they are, as he's smoking cigars and drinking alcohol and talking about how terrible his lifestyle habits and how he wants to hire me to be, not to tell him, I said, I can be your teacher and teach you how to be healthy, but I'm not here to coach you. I'm not your daddy. I'm not going to enforce things on you to do things you already know you should be doing. But the point I'm getting at is the paradigm is so interesting. This is someone who thinks that technology will save him from all of his bad lifestyle habits and that he can just spend money and that technology will evolve and fix his lifestyle habits and that he doesn't have to move and try to replicate the environment of his ancestors. All that's nonsense. That's primitive. I'm just going to inject some nanobots in me and do some advanced blood chemistry testing and then take the pills that my doctor says to take.
Totally.
Right? So, and I would just love to hear your thoughts on those kind of two schools of thinking.
Health businesses that give people permission to do the things that they want to do are often successful. Like, put so much butter in that coffee. You got a lot of things that are actually natural reinforcers. So the caffeine and then the butter, right? That was prime for success. And then also the license, right? The license is a psychological term that gives you the ability to say, I can do this. An authority said this is why I lost all this weight. So I think that thinking, either consciously, explicitly stated or subconsciously hoped for, is pervasive in our world. And it is a result of the fact that we don't train people appropriately. And it comes to a point that I wanted to make that I actually didn't even have time to include in my talk. But recently, very sadly, a very good friend's father passed away with cancer. And to juxtapose his experience, a friend of mine also came down with cancer and he did fasting. And we know that fasting shows some very interesting potential for augmenting the effects of chemotherapy. And so my friend Mike, who's a young guy, had stage 4, which was like a death sentence. He did Walter Longo's fasting program and he's now 100% cancer free.
Wow.
Great.
Was that in conjunction with chemotherapy or?
Yeah, it was. Okay. Yeah. So not to go on this tangent, but what fasting has been shown to do is called differential stress sensitization, so that the healthy cells become stronger. The cancer cells, due to differences in metabolism, become weaker. And then the result is when the chemotherapy comes in, the healthy cells are more preserved and the cancer cells are weaker and die. And so that has been a very effective therapy. And in fact, they're both effective, but they're synergistic together. So that's really exciting. It's an example. But this other gentleman who I'm speaking about, I broached it with him and he didn't have the capability to even consider it. I think that we think that we can live however we want, but when the crisis happens, we'll spring to action and we can do it. And that's not always the case. And the sad part to me is that, it might not have worked for him. I'm not even saying that he should have, but it wasn't an option and it could have saved him, possibly, but it wasn't an option because he didn't have the ability to actually take advantage of his responsibility in his health, which was to do anything other than take a pill or show up to a doctor's appointment on time. And that is a problem. It's a problem that goes back to the education. So it's not necessarily just that we're teaching, but we have to teach the capacity to take care of yourself, evolve that. So all of our thinking on how to do this, I've also envisioned this time where if you think about the analogy of AI and that game Go. So the Go is, I've never played it, but it's apparently extraordinarily complex. And they wanted to put Go against the world's best Go player because they thought there would be no way that this AI could sort of figure it all out. So how would it do? And if I'm telling the story correctly, Go won hands down. It beat this guy 100 times in a row, whatever those numbers were. But it did so in a way that it played the game in a way that had never been done before. Right now, we are all operating under certain ideas that have been spread into the world, and then we are doing versions of them, and some of those versions kind of change and evolve. We could use technology to say, you know what, this is the easiest, most effective way to be healthy. You're going to get 80% of the effects, and it's way easier if you do this. We'll probably come to a time where we might actually have those types of discoveries. But so that I'm excited about what technology can do. But I think that until we know, until then, this idea that it's going to save me at the end, it's going to come in like a deus de machina, the God in the machine. It's going to then just solve the problem for you. Not only is that, I think the biggest issue is that it's a missed opportunity. Because again, health is not just about delaying disease, it's actually about richness of your day. Mm-hmm. And that is the best. And so I'm not somebody who's like, you need to live like a Spartan in order to, if you're attending to personal responsibility. And it's sort of why I like biohacking, which is a term that I think does not live into its full potential at the moment, because it's fringy. It's all about sort of trying the latest gear. But from a higher level, I think from a more pure level, it is the idea of doing little experiments on yourself and trying to be observant of those, collecting objective data, but also then listening to yourself and then seeing, yes, did this make me feel better? Do I have energy? And with things, we can become so intoxicated with a paradigm that we can be blind to the fact that it's not serving us well until the signal's strong enough. And so I think if you can go through life taking care of a lot of the things that we know are really good for us and just living naturally, it doesn't have to be as complex as it sounds. Going for walks and sleeping and things that actually do feel good to you, and then doing little experiments to say, well, does this diet help me more than the other one? Hearing people share their perspective and trying to understand it well enough where I love the saying, have strong opinions held loosely. And to me, what that means is that you learn something well enough where you understand it, and then you think through what you've learned to say, this is where I stand now. But held loosely means that you're not then the person who is going to defend an opinion, even in the face of data that is very convincing. They just become as the zealot, right? The health field is filled with that. And there are people that are searching for simplicity and they don't want their framework to be challenged. And I get that too. But I think that having this capacity to then not completely trend hop where whatever's popular and new, I'm only doing that. But that you still actually say, all right, new information is coming out. Why don't I give this a shot? And by the way, the how you feel paradigm isn't perfect either. There is no perfect solution here. But at the moment, I don't know of a better one.
Yeah, interesting. So, one thing that came to mind for me as you're talking is, oh shit, I'm actually sorry. One sec. I'm just 1 second.
Yeah.
And I'll edit this out. No worries.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. Shit. Now I lost my train of thought.
I was saying all sorts of things. I was talking about sort of this idea of biohacking and testing. Mm-hmm. So I see it as like an engagement with like these new ideas that will undoubtedly come out, but not at the expense of giving up on sort of, you're adding arrows to your quiver in a way, but you're not looking for that one silver arrow in a way. You're being like, okay, I know myself well. I'm checking in. I'm learning. I'm exploring. It's a lifetime of learning, I think.
Yeah.
And yet it doesn't necessarily have to be a lifetime of fickle experiments where you're just jumping all over the place. It shouldn't be that, but can you pick up a little tip here and there? And I think also another thing that's very, very useful is having an orchestrating principle so that not all of your health actions are these hundreds of diverse things that don't come together. But I think this idea, this commander intent of living naturally within your day means you're getting light exposure, right? You're I think my opinion is, how did hunter-gatherers live? And let's not try to live exactly like them, but let's use that as a part of our model to inform us. And then let's also look at science. Let's also look at our life. And then all of that helps you formulate your current approach. And some people might say, I got a great approach and it includes a lot of things. I'm just going to set it and forget it. And that's cool too. That's cool too. And for those that want to be like, gosh, hey, I smoke cigars and I drink, whatever, can you do better, right? Can you actually do some other things in your life that's going to then nudge you into this feeling of like, wow, I'm now getting in touch with what health feels like. Maybe in 2 years from now, after making kind of concurrent progressive benefit there, some of these habits that you've built over time are thrown out.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, I'm still all about going out and living life richly. So I think we have to always juxtapose that.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I wanted to say, as you're talking about like kind of this idea of like certain people are saying like technology will save us at the end.
Yeah.
I actually remember growing up as a kid and having this idea of modern medicine is so advanced and they're on the verge of finding cures for like every disease. Yeah. And I literally remember having kind of ideas like that, like seeing news reports, like we're going to cure this disease and that disease. And at some point in my teens, I realized, as I started studying health, I realized, oh, these diseases are actually dramatically increasing in prevalence. We're not finding cures to these diseases. We've been pursuing this for decades with very little progress. And I think if people understood that historical context of like how fruitless the pursuit of pharmaceutical fixes for most chronic diseases has been. I think probably most people are like me, that they grew up with that perception as modern medicine is so advanced. It's this amazing science and they're going to find cures for all these different things. And if I get a disease, sure enough, modern medicine will almost certainly have a cure for me by the time I ever get a disease. And then I think most people are met with this very harsh reality if they're actually in that situation. I have a disease and they don't have a cure for me. To what extent do you think technology improvements will have a key role in fixing our health and our chronic diseases? Or to what extent do you think it's necessary for us to be like, hey, technology is not going to save us. Modern medicine, pharmaceuticals are not going to save us. Vaccines are not going to save us from most of these chronic diseases. And we need to actually get serious about moving towards more of an ancestral lifestyle habit, pattern, and kind of mimic that ancestral environment. What's your feeling on that? And my feeling personally is very much on the side of we need to get serious about moving towards ancestral ways of life. And I'm also kind of a hardcore sort of survival of the fittest sort of person with that in mind, meaning the people who don't do that, like I think that they will suffer serious health consequences as a result of that. They might procreate before that, but they're going to suffer serious health consequences and have very poor quality of life as a result of their choice. I don't think everyone can be saved, but I do think it's up to the individual to make that decision for themselves.
I think that this idea of self-preservation and self-care is natural for humans. And I think a lot more people care than what you might assume simply observing the situation. The way that we live has a lot to do with the environment we live in and how people live around us and the options we have, right? The options we make are ultimately subjugated to the options we have. And that's also true too. So if you live in a food desert and you don't have good options, you might have to make an extra normal effort to do the better. And so we live in wonderful parts of the country where we've got a lot of good options to kind of take advantage of. And what's also interesting too is the robustness that you feel in life can lead to better efforts towards your health too. So that's part of the reason why you can get somebody exposure their own ability to then do more things that make them feel even better can rise. I think that technology works when it empowers us to live more naturally in a technology-driven world. So, for example, like the step counter, the much maligned Fitbit and step counter. People were so disappointed about it because they were expecting it to save us. When the Fitbit, genomics tests, all of these things can possibly offer value, but they're not going to be a solution. They might just help nudge us in the right way. You still need to be at the center, taking that good information and utilizing it. So let's say you go to the company Habit and you get a metabolic test and you get your genomic test and they say, this is your diet. Well, we've been telling people that this is the right diet, insert diet here, Mediterranean, whatever, for years. And it's now the people, it's sort of like we're sort of selling people a pig in a poke. The reason why we haven't had this success is because our guidance was totally off. Sure, guidance has evolved, et cetera. People have made serious efforts towards things that were going to yield probably poor results no matter what, undoubtedly. But I think that the tech overall is not, we're not going to find that one thing that solves us, but undoubtedly we were going to learn more about the gut. When we get to a place where we can get a personalized probiotic that can yield better, health outcomes because it's personalized to you, cool. I'll totally embrace that when I see it. But right now, I think that what we're doing is we're still searching for that magic silver bullet within our own genes, where you walk down that expensive process, both time and money, and you end up getting a recommendation for virtually the Mediterranean diet. Because, unless you have some sort of monogenic trait that's dominating your health, something that is causing a failure, so much about our world is polygenic. So there's multiple genes that are interacting, that are influencing the equation. Then there's, of course, your epigenome, and then there's the way that you live, which is influencing all of it. And so it's kind of like the guy on the beach waiting for the nanobots to save him. These things could help, but they're not going to do it for you.
Right.
Tech is going to be healthy for you. It can empower you in your ability to be healthy. So all of the tech that I'm building is about education, making you better, making your day easier, and then just keeping you engaged with the goals that you set. So where do I think real innovation might come from? Aging research. That might be the next step function elevation, like antibiotics and vaccines were in lifespan, because they're not trying to address symptoms of, let's say, a very organ system oriented perspective of health, like, oh, you have heart disease. Well, really you have heart disease because you have a body that is failing because of the way that it's been living, most likely. And that's why the co-occurrence of, if you have diabetes or heart disease, you probably have diabetes and are obese. There's all these things that occur at the same time. We just call them X when they meet a certain, clinical criteria. Aging, however, that is getting more at the fundamental root of things, but there's still a cautionary tale to be told. I think there's really great promise here, but let's say you come up with something like an exercise mimetic that generates one of the signals involved in exercise. Does it generate all of the signals that are involved in exercise? Will it give people license to no longer do the exercise because they're getting a fraction of the benefit that they can feel that's real, but it's now causing them to live in a way that's actually, it's just giving them license to live poorly. We're going to see that. We're going to see that. So I think that all the tech, again, it's better when it helps you do more things. I mean, I still think even with aging science, the better you live, the more that it's going to have a chance to help you continue to live youthfully for longer. And we'll see. That's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely. One last thing I want to comment on is you brought up genetics, and I know this is something we talked about briefly before, but it's kind of this interesting paradox between having the appearance of being so remarkably scientifically advanced. Like one can have the impression that, oh, I'm going to get my genes sequenced, run them through this gene analyzer that tells me the optimal diet for my genes.
Yeah.
And the optimal lifestyle habits that I should be doing based on my genes. It has the feeling for the average, typical person that, oh, this is the pinnacle of scientific achievement and is the most scientifically advanced thing that I can do.
Yeah.
And in reality, it's very much the opposite. This is so much of what is going on in that realm is like has very little research to support those recommendations, and so much of those things it's just like it's all just a facade with very little actual evidence to back it up.
I think we might come to an inflection point at some point in the future where we can use machine learning and AI to then look at all of the different systems that are intervening to then give us better recommendations. Mm-hmm. But I think what we're hoping for is something that's going to give us permission to just keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Basically, that's really what you should be eating ice cream and pizza all day while watching Netflix.
And that's what I do.
Well, Dan, this has been such a pleasure. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. I think this is so important for people to understand this kind of meta view of how to approach health and what's the right mindset to take into this vast amount of information that we're constantly being bombarded with. I think this is absolutely critical for people to understand. And I know people are going to love this. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find out more about your brilliant work with humanOS?
Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, come check out. It's humanos.me, and you can sign up for a basic account, explore the site a little bit. We have a pro offering, which is $9.99 a month. My personal mission is to create high-value, low-cost solutions, so that cost is not the barrier for somebody getting access to something that can really help them if they want to go there. And so I've been chided for not charging more given what we give, but I feel good about.
I was one of the people that chided you.
Yeah, I mean, I get it, right? I mean, like we have to make humanOS a very sustainable business so that we can keep doing all the work that we want. So we have to have the right business model here, but that is one of the efforts. Also go to humanOS Radio. So if you go to humanOS, you'll see our blog, every podcast that we publish and blog. You can find there, but it's been really fun. So the way we sort of differentiate is I interview mostly professors about their research, but also executives that might be, have left academia that are starting some healthcare company or health company in an entrepreneurial fashion to say, hey, we think this is a really good idea to capitalize on. And I think a closing thought is that while a lot of the nature of this talk might sound dismissive of all these different ideas, I think that they will continue to yield value. They'll also continue to yield a lot of false starts. You can over-intervene, but I think with the right mind frame, if you just ask, does this make me better at doing the things that the taking action part, then I think that's the best sort of tech. So with that mind frame in mind, I'll close, invite you to come check it out, but you're also in good hands with Ari, so you could just stay there too, and you're gonna do well.
No, I everybody who listens to my podcast, I want them to also listen to yours, because I think they're really complementary. We cover similar topics, but we also tend to interview different people, and I think they're very much synergistic, and I would love for people to follow your work. I do myself. And also, just to comment with more specifics about what I've chided you for with regard to your program. Dan has a membership program with access to all kinds of courses, really extremely well put together courses with extremely high quality content on topics from how to lose weight to name off some of the other courses for me.
Yeah, so a lot of what we talked about today is this one called Road of Health, which is like 25 minutes, and it's the mind frame. Fasting. By the way, all of our courses are peer reviewed. So I find somebody that has really made themselves an expert. Sometimes that means they published. And then we run it by a professor in that space who's doing research in that area so that they can review. Now, that doesn't lead to perfection, but what we wanted to do is, a lot of people have opinions, and we wanted to create a process that led to a higher level of confidence that, the errors that we made along the way could be identified before it went public. And so I really like that approach. And I'll say one other thing too, that you said about the synergy of our shows. I don't think all the value that can be gained only happen from researchers and, CEOs. I also think a huge amount of value also comes from people that are are sort of have where the rubber meets the road. They're working with clients. They're seeing what they, they're figuring out what actually works in real life. And I think that you're right. It's the synergy. It's not, again, sort of silver bulleting in evidence-based medicine versus the clinician. It's really the answers is unclear. It's somewhere between all of them. And can you have that bandwidth to sort of be open to finding that right idea across these different ways of sort of accessing knowledge?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also the peer review component is really, really important for people to have confidence in your courses. And that is an important differentiating factor, because there's so much contradictory and conflicting information out there in the health space, with so many different experts saying, oh, carbs are, the carbs are the cause. No, it's calories. No, it's, lectins. No, you go vegan, go keto, all this kind of stuff constantly, that people are being bombarded with. People are confused. People don't know what to believe. And I think that what you're doing is really important. I've gone about it a different way and I really appreciate the way you've gone about it. I probably should have gone the same way, but I've just kind of established a reputation over the years from people who follow me that are like, no, he's actually very clear and honest about what is supported by the evidence and what isn't. And I've even witnessed him change his views on certain things as the evidence has evolved, and he openly will acknowledge and change his views. And I've just established a reputation, and people have developed trust for me because they see that I'm genuinely interested in what is the truth, not my, promoting my specific dogmas are the one true way. But I think what you're doing is great, because people can have immediate trust without following you for several years, like I've done, like the way that I've done it. And they know, okay, this is produced by an expert. This is reviewed by another third-party expert, and this is really high-quality material. And I can be one of those third parties, too, that will vouch for how high-quality your material is. But just one more thing, real specifically, I chided you because you're offering so much great content for $10 a month. And I said, you're nuts. You're actually devaluing the work that you're doing by offering it so cheap. People will assume it's low quality or very, they're just getting this little free, little cheap ebook for $10 or something. Right. But the truth is they're getting amazing courses for $10 a month. The reason that you do that is obviously because you're hoping to scale this to a very, very large number of users. So you want to get ideally tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. So then it becomes something that can work for you. But obviously if you have 50 people at $10 a month, it's like you can't really live off that. So especially when you're paying a team of people to put together courses and a team of people to put up your website and all the other employees that you have to run a business like that. So I think the end result here is for the consumer, they're getting access to amazing material for $10 a month, which is remarkable.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'll say one other thing about the courses. I really appreciate that endorsement, Ari. And it's that we want to cover a lot of different subjects, but what we want to do is put out the steel man version of that. So the straw man is this super weak version that's a terrible representation of, let's say, I'm a paleo guy and I put up the straw man version of vegan diet, and I just represent it in a way that creates the biggest difference between my opinion about what I think is the right way to do and that crappy version of it. That's an example. What we're trying to do is whatever is out there, can we create what is the very best version of that idea? And that's our goal. Whether or not we achieve it, that's another thing. But I think what also the sort of the synergy, what you're doing is you're trying to look through all the different paradigm and saying, where's this, what can we do here? Navigate between that. And I think that's really valuable too. So that is, I think, synergy. I think that your wisdom, if you learn something the right way and you learn it from a good source, your overall wisdom on health can elevate, right? And so it's not just an academic exercise, but is one that is totally worth it because you're the one that is the direct beneficiary, but then also because you're like, I'm starting to see these relationships between these different subjects. And there's a lot of epiphanies that can happen then when you're like, okay, I'm understanding health differently, which then also means that you're more resistant to the latest hotness kind of completely just undermining whatever you're already doing or changing your perspective when maybe it's a little premature to do so. So I'm totally in the camp of I will evolve. I wonder how I'll feel a year from now, 2 years from now. I'm excited about that, the new perspective. But at the same time, like, I'm really proud that even though it's a slower process, that I can look back on. I'll go take our courses multiple times, and I'll be like, yeah, okay, that's really solid. So, thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, Dan, honestly, been such a pleasure having you on, and thank you so much. And like I said at the beginning, this is the first of many. I know we're going to do one on brain health, one on sleep research, which you've been an expert in that area for a long time. And I know there's plenty more to talk about beyond that. So I think this is a great introduction to Dan Pardi and humanOS. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you again, Dan, and I'll talk to you again very soon.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Thanks so much for spending some time with me and for all the nice things that you said and the great questions. And I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, my pleasure.